I just beat Fallout London, and I feel like I could finally say this is the best Fallout 4 mod we have ever gotten. After spending about 35 hours with this mod, I have some thoughts. Lots of positive thoughts, but some negative ones also. But at its core, Fallout London is just insane. This truly is a new Fallout game. The sheer scale of this one alone is immense. It took me 25 hours just to get through the main story of Fallout London, and with all of the side quests as well as lengthy faction quest lines, this is very likely a 50+ hour experience, if not even longer. This team worked on this game for 5 years and then just dropped it for all of us totally for free. The sheer scale of Fallout London is definitely one of its most impressive parts, but it's also its dedication to detail, as Fallout London really feels like a breath of fresh air for Fallout overall. It almost makes you wish Bethesda would give us a non-American Fallout expansion at some point, and you can even find some online starting to argue that Fallout London the mod is in fact better than Fallout 4 itself. So I'm not saying I agree with that sentiment, that Fallout London is actually better than Fallout 4, but what I will say is, after beating the mod, I could totally see how the argument can be made. Because Fallout London manages to strike that ideal balance. As you play it, it still obviously feels like Fallout, but it does have that incredibly iconic London twist to everything. And I think the reason this works so well is the London team just put in the work. One of the major things you'll notice while playing Fallout London is how almost everything is different. This team went through and simply replaced almost all of the assets from Fallout 4's Commonwealth to make sure London felt totally distinct. An obvious example is the weapons, and we will talk more about these later, but nearly every NPC you encounter while exploring around London will be using a totally new weapon, and oftentimes even wearing a completely new set of armor or clothing. So from the onset, just the visual pass of the town and people you're interacting with, everything feels fresh and new. Nearly all of the junk items are different, from desk fans to typewriters or even telephones. They're functionally the exact same piece of junk from base Fallout 4, but the London team just went through and put in the effort of giving each of these new models so London will feel different. But even just that overarching world, the building kits used for structures, roads, and even the cars are all new for this mod. Even many of the weathers are edited compared to vanilla Fallout 4. And what elevates this all is it's not just the visuals, but many of your interactions in this world will also be new and fresh. London has a whole suite of new enemies that you've never encountered before. And going up against some of these can definitely elicit some strong reaction, or even almost all of the NPCs having some type of dialogue for when you get too close to them, a distinctly London feature.
Am I invisible, or are you an invalid? Which is it?
In a hurry? An important meeting, perhaps? I think not.
And even a ton of new collectibles. These aren't bobbleheads from Fallout 4, as London features several new and unique types of collectibles of its own. It really feels like the team thought of everything. And of course, there's a ton more even beyond that. This is all to say that the Fallout London team put in a mountain of effort where other projects just don't. They went through and literally remade almost everything so the entire experience would feel new and fresh, even though just reusing assets likely would have saved thousands of hours of dev time. And one of the other unique aspects about this mod is how it evolves as you play. Fallout London is very strategically laid out, so more and more of London becomes available as you play through this mod. The Thames is incredibly radioactive, so you're basically forced into specific paths and certain interactions with a few major factions early on, and although it kind of sounds contrived as I describe it here, in actual gameplay terms, this becomes a very organic way to introduce you to London over time. And then, as you start those quest lines with some of those major factions, you're gradually introduced to more and more districts of London. So even if some of you have played 10 to 15 hours of Fallout London, let me tell you, you haven't even found the entire map yet. Like, this map looks pretty full, right? Well, this is actually only a subset of the map, as several districts have standalone maps that you'll unlock as you get to them. So particularly with Westminster, when you actually get to Westminster for the first time, it feels like you opened an entire DLC-sized area that has a ton of additional quests, things to find, and even a lot of unique pieces of new content. You don't even find Westminster until Act 2 of the mod. And there are several other districts just like that that you'll only unlock later on. And as you're playing, it generally feels like you have endless exploration, with more and more of the city opening up as you progress. And a big part of this is you're constantly meeting new people and unlocking quest lines for them. You won't even meet Camelot, one of the most publicized of the factions, until Act 3 of the mod. The team here really did a great job at making this feel consistently rewarding. As you unlock new districts, things don't feel similar. It feels like you are in an evolving world. And going into Westminster for the first time is just an experience. The streets are clean, there are working trains, and even cabs you can utilize here. But then go back to Islington for a quest and you'll just find destruction and disarray. Each district in Fallout London has its own ruling faction, and in turn, a whole set of quests that will take you in and around that district, which does create this really fun experience. As you do the main quest, you'll be introduced to these new districts and basically meet a bunch of people there. And then you probably will get a bunch of side or faction related quest lines that you can take on. So you could end up spending several hours just getting to know these people before eventually returning to the main quest and moving on to the next district where you could effectively repeat that exact process. And over time, you really do begin to start to feel attached to those peoples in a certain area. And I gotta say, this fan-made mod managed to do a better job at making these peoples feel distinct and unique than some of the mainline Fallout games. Questing in Fallout London is fine. I feel like with this one, the quantity and scale of some of the quests are insane. Like how much content is actually here is what makes it all so impressive. But many of the individual quests and the overall writing is just fine. At points, it's really good, and at other points, it's just okay. But one of the aspects of Fallout London questing that really surprised me is how there are multiple ways to complete many of the quests in this mod. Oftentimes, you'll have several options on how to complete a certain objective. So at one point in the mod, you'll need a signature from the various district heads to get a royal decree. And there are several ways to get that signature. You can just take out the district head going the full violence path, and you'll have to find a hidden note somewhere that you could then take to a forger character who will fake the signature of that district head for a fee. You can just do some work for the district head as it'll spawn off a quest or two, and after completing those quests for them, they'll sign the paper for you. Or even other times, just have some dialogue options or even skill checks that you can pass to get the signature more easily. That's just one of the examples, but consistently throughout this mod, I found that there were several paths to complete quests, and I seriously appreciated that. Even just speaking about Fallout London overall, you can beat this mod with 3 different factions, and your experience at the end will be very different depending on which faction you're siding with. You will encounter a wide array of different factions while playing this one, and each really does have its own unique identity and even feelings about London overall, as well as the other factions here. Some of the quest lines are looking at some of the gangs of London, and there is a full-fledged gang war quest line that has a very specific theme. But separately, there's also a group of people just looking for solace in London, and that quest line has a very different theme, where you're really helping a bunch of underdogs out, and you have a full quest line where you can support them, but also a ton more. Fallout London has this through-point main quest, but each of the major factions also has a quest line you could do for them. Some of these are directly intertwined with the main quest, but then for many, you continue that separate from the main quest, and some of the faction endings are even more moving than some of the main quest endings. One of the other pretty interesting parts about Fallout London is how often they didn't use quest markers. Oftentimes, you'll be led to a certain location, or really a dungeon, and once you're inside, the quest markers are just gone. You'll have a task to find something, and all you know is, okay, it's in this building somewhere. So I personally found this pretty fun. A lot of times it was nice to not have the game be as handholdy as it typically is in Fallout 4, but at other points, with how tedious some of these items could be to find, it could definitely get old. Like, yeah, when you're spending 30 minutes looking for this tiny key, you kind of just wish there was a quest marker on it eventually. But that's too I appreciated. It made the mod feel like some of the older Fallouts and a lot less handholdy than Fallout 4, and just overall, it gave some of the questing in Fallout London a certain novelty that we haven't really been seeing from some of the recent Fallout games. And many of the quests in Fallout London are just interesting and fun. I was robbing the Bank of England, doing train heists, literally fighting for the fate of London, and even getting into boat shootouts. While the writing was merely okay, in my opinion, some of the actual quest gameplay was incredibly fun. And a lot of times, I was excited to do that next quest because it just had some epic set dressing. And actually, if you want to see some of that in the latter half of this video, I'm going to specifically highlight and show some of my favorite quest moments from Fallout London. But one aspect of Fallout London that did begin to get old was just how fetch questy things could be at points. And the map layout certainly contributes to this. Fallout London oftentimes would have this thing where you need to get something from person X, but to get that, you need to get something from person Y first, and person Y has 1 or 2 quests you have to do with them, and actually it's not just 1 person, but actually 3. So at several points in this mod, you'll likely just want to do the next main quest to progress that overarching story, but in order to actually get to the next step of the main quest, there's 6 secondary side quests that you'll have to complete to basically make all of these people happy. And while some of these are really fun, like that train heist I mentioned a bit earlier, or even robbing the Bank of England, some of these other ones are a lot simpler, and it just feels a lot more like a simple fetch quest where you're dealing with individuals. And the map layout makes this a lot worse. Due to how districts are broken up in London, sometimes you're actually going between several districts, and that means several different load screens. So some quests in London definitely felt Starfield-esque as as almost load screen and running simulators where I really wasn't doing much in terms of actual enjoyable gameplay. So now thankfully, this is a relatively small part of the mod, but for me, this was definitely the low point of the mod overall. The voice acting in Fallout London was somewhat mixed in that some voices sound better than others.
I don't care! Polyester can eat my ass! I don't want to talk to anyone.
I mean, those hooligans, they just tore through the place.
Stop this madness at once! Is there not a grain of sense between you?
If the old man wants to fight, let him.
By all means, fight.
But honestly, the sheer amount of voice acting that this mod contains just blew me away. Like, for it to be this consistently good, and then to have this many different characters fully voice acted is incredible. Easily one of the most impressive feats of Fallout London overall. And Fallout London also just has a ton of dialogue. You would think with something on this scale that there'd be some sparsity of choices, but it felt like during every single quest, you had plenty of secondary dialogue options to just gain more context or find out about specific factions or characters. If you want to start to understand the world and peoples of London, the dialogue options are definitely there, and they're really well done voice acting wise. When it comes to the role-playing side of this, things were a bit more mixed. Like, yeah, you could roleplay to a certain degree of the generic good or evil options, but at points in dialogue, sometimes you'd have a few dialogue options. You're like, okay, they're all effectively saying the same thing. There's not really much variance in where you're going with each of these. But speaking of Fallout London overall, I found this to be more of an RPG, particularly compared to Fallout 4. The mod has a massive amount of skill checks within it, including some in the initial minutes of this mod, which was pretty cool to me. Most of these will pop up in dialogue, and I noticed two different types of these. Some are just the familiar special checks, so if you have a special stat high enough, you'll unlock some new dialogue or a different path through that dialogue. I played as a high charisma character, and this came in handy constantly, whether it was making my next objective easier or not having to do something at all, getting more caps out of a trade, or sometimes even just passing a skill check only to be told they can't actually offer more.
Not my problem, sweetie. Take it up with Gaunt if you like, but don't blame me if he just blows your head off.
That was just a one-off interaction, but I found it pretty awesome and very realistic. But yeah, how you build your character in Fallout London has a very large impact on dialogue, and I really enjoyed that factor. But also, some of your perks can come into play here. On more than one occasion, I had some unique dialogue opportunities as a result of a perk I had taken, and some of these will open up into completely new segments of dialogue or background information. I love this, and overall, I think the mod did a great job at making how you built out your character feel like a very relevant part of navigating this story. When it comes to the actual quest consequences, there are definitely some overarching choices you can make. Like at one point, when I didn't want to get this guy's signature, I just massacred him and his entire faction. Well, apparently some of the other people in London's world cared about this, so one of the other factions was immediately made aggro to me. So from that one choice, I just cut off one of the potential ending factions out of 3 for this mod. Fallout London definitely had quite a few of those bigger decisions where you could really have an impact on things one way or another, and overall I felt like my choices during various quests did have a fair amount of consequence in the world. It's not quite on par with something like Fallout New Vegas, but it's definitely better than Fallout 4. And overall, I really enjoyed the questing of Fallout London. There are high and low points, and it definitely isn't perfect. I don't think Fallout London's story is necessarily one of its strongest points, but the actual questing content is pretty fun. A lot of times the objectives were enjoyable, and many of the characters you're interacting with are interesting and do genuinely elevate the mod. As well as a lot of the quest content is uniquely London, which does have a certain novelty to it. You'll find tons of references to British things or even interact with iconic British people. And through the story, you're doing lots of these quests at or around iconic landmarks. Even if you've never been to London, you'll recognize some of these. If you have been to London, you'll likely have some pretty memorable experiences during some of these quests, as this mod does an incredible job at faithfully recreating some of these landmarks. Oh yeah, and Fallout London has ladders scattered throughout it, which really just makes it better than all of the American Fallouts. And one aspect of Fallout London that will likely be a surprising change up for many of you is its combat. Fallout London is not only considerably harder than vanilla Fallout 4, but it's also just different. Melee weapons take a much larger focus in London, as guns are generally meant to be more sparse. And I found this to be quite a bit of fun. Fallout London introduces a ton of new melee weapons, and several of these are pretty unique in their gameplay. But this also means that in the early game, finding good weapons and really ammo for those weapons is hard, to the point where you'll likely rely on using a combination of melee and ranged weapons early on. After playing Fallout 4 so many times, just getting handed a ton of great equipment in the early part of that game, this felt like a really nice change up. I found myself relying mostly on melee for the entire first act of Fallout London, and I was only using my ranged weapons for some of the tougher or particularly far away enemies. I think for most of us, we don't really use melee in Fallout games all that often, so the novelty of relying on it so heavily here, especially with a ton of new melee weapons that are really interesting and unique, makes that experience in Fallout London fun. Plus, a lot of the times it's melee on melee, as other enemies will rely on this as well. But the mod is also just generally hard, stim packs are fairly sparse, and you begin the mod with a debuff to damage output as well as taking increasing damage dealt, but you can cure these through the story. So early on, you're conserving ammo, relying on food to heal yourself, and it creates some fun gameplay moments. It's almost like a pseudo survival mode in those early hours of Fallout London. And mind you, I'm only playing on normal. This is a very difficult mod, even on normal difficulty. I have to imagine on actual survival, this will be a pretty memorable experience. Ammo crafting is also back with Fallout London, and I actually needed to do that. I probably bought more ammo from vendors in Fallout London than I have in my entire 2,000 hours in Fallout 4. By the mid to late game, things improve here as you get a bit more comfortable in your build and really just have more equipment overall, but I found the overall balance of Fallout London to be consistently harder than Fallout 4 while still being really fun. I generally enjoyed how hard this mod was at times, even just playing on normal difficulty. Although there definitely could be some issues here as well. As of right now, there are a couple of bugs that can artificially decrease your damage output or potentially even increase how much damage you are taking. Fortunately, I didn't have those issues while I was playing, but if the game seems a little bit too hard, one of these bugs may be impacting you. And speaking of, unfortunately, it isn't all positive when it comes to Fallout London, as while this may be the best Fallout mod ever, it's still a Fallout mod, and that does mean bugs. A lot of people are having difficulties with the downgrading process of Fallout London, and it's been covered to death. It's unfortunate. It's probably a mix of some issues with the downgrader, but also some issues on the user side. But even in the mod itself, there are also some problems. There definitely is a lot of crashing, particularly if you're not using mods like Buff Out 4 or the long load times fix. It seems like you can get way too much crashing. Although if you do use those mods, the crashing seems to be a lot lower. Still not perfect. I would probably say in my 30 to 35 hours with Fallout London, I crashed about a dozen times, which honestly is probably on par with a typical Bethesda release. Although at the same time, I did encounter some other bugs, which definitely can be frustrating. There's a dog companion in Fallout London named Churchill, who I was using through much of my early game experience, but at some point, Churchill turned into a typical dog meat, which was rather unfortunate, and things just weren't the same after that, so I had to take him behind the shed. There's some quest blocking problems in Fallout London. Walking to a certain area led to crashes every single time until I loaded an earlier save to get around that. I had this courier who had to deliver me a message for one of the final quests, but he kept getting downed over and over, not actually allowing me to talk to them. So I had to use some console commands to give them a ton more health so I could finally have this interaction. But honestly, that was the bulk of my issues. I would say crashing was probably the most prevalent of them, but other than that, this really wasn't all that bad as far as bugs go. Compared to most mod releases, Fallout London is remarkably bug-free. You could definitely tell QA work was put into this one. And if anything, I would put my experience with Fallout London pretty on par with my experience reviewing Starfield. Yeah, sure, I got some crashes, a progress blocker or two that I needed to use a console command to fix, but otherwise things were mostly fine. It's not like my 35 hours were a bug-ridden mess. No, things were relatively smooth the vast majority of the time with a few blips here or there. And the Fallout London team has said a patch is coming to address some of the major issues, so hopefully things will only continue to improve as we go forward. Although performance is definitely an aspect of this mod that people may have issues with, the city of London is super ambitious in Fallout London, and as a result, performance definitely takes a hit at some points. Lots of the time it was totally fine. I would have that rock solid 120 FPS, but then in some areas you would just plummet. Going to Westminster in general cut my FPS in half because it is a far more detail-rich area, and even some of the notable landmarks just have a ton going on and will seriously lower your FPS. But it's one of those weird things where I almost prefer it this way. I feel like the team worked to create a stunning city, and I'd rather have it actually be there in all its glory and detail with lower FPS than have it be a cut down city or have more load screens and have more FPS. And even with the FPS drops, I still found this mod perfectly playable. Like yeah, at points my FPS was lower, but it was definitely never to the point where it was a genuine issue for this mod. Although of course, this is going to be a very specific detail. For me, on my specific setup, on my specific system, it wasn't a big problem. I could definitely see this being a problem on weaker PCs. And to just reiterate some of my issues from earlier, some of the quests have very hard to find items, near impossible, and the only real solution is to look up answers on the Fallout London Discord, although thankfully that Discord is very helpful. Some interiors for locations are convoluted or just generally boring. Like there are some locations where you only ever need to get to one room in this entire building, but that room is off to the side and up a flight of stairs. So you just always fast travel here, then have to do 30 seconds of running over and over and over, and that could definitely get tedious. Some of the interior designs felt needlessly convoluted, and like realism was preferred over practicality. Like yeah, just put the office on the ground floor, even if technically it wouldn't be there in real life. Some locations have quest markers, but not much else. Like some locations, you kind of just go in and it looks kind of cool, but there's really not anything going on there. It's not a genuine point of interest with things to find. And some interiors literally had nothing in the way of notes or stories to tell, which felt like a bit of a step away compared to some of the mainline Fallout games. But honestly, I felt like there was so much other content in other places that this didn't bother me that much. As well as some quests do become fetch questy. Do 3 quests to get this person to let you in, and now repeat that same exact process for several other people. It happens a couple times over the course of this story, and again, due to the way the map is laid out, this means a lot of fast traveling and a lot of load screens. But overall, Fallout London is definitely something special. This mod is simply unlike any other Fallout mod we have ever gotten due to its size, quality, and just how much new content it's actually bringing to you for free. If you haven't tried Fallout London yet, you definitely need to, and more may even be coming. Fallout London already has its own Nexus page, and many people are already creating mods for the mod, so it will be interesting to see where all of that goes. But if you're looking for more reasons to play London and you don't mind light spoilers, I now want to highlight some of the most interesting things I found or experienced while playing this mod, and some of the fun side quests I found. For most of my playtime in Fallout London, I was adventuring around with Lord Mountbatten, who is absolutely hilarious. You could find him just hanging upside down. You'll probably naturally stumble upon him during one of the main quests.
Oh my. Yes. Yes. Up here. Are you going to help me down? Wonderful. Wonderful. Simply untangle my foot, and I shall gracefully drop to the floor below. Just let me count down first. On 1, 3, 2, 1. No! As far as holidays go, that was not to my liking. I don't see myself hanging from another sign anytime soon.
And upon rescuing him, you take him on as your own companion, and he will deliver some hilarious lines over the entire course of this game.
Anyone hurt? No? Just me? I'm all for trying new things, but this takes it to a whole new level. Of course. Thank you for listening.
But one of my favorite interactions was with this bridge. Fallout London has 2 very notable bridges with Tower Bridge and London Bridge. Tower Bridge is just generally iconic, but now you can find it occupied by these new beef eater enemies who have a very specific taste for flesh. Yeah, they like a specific type of beef. And as interesting as exploring this location is, things become even more interesting over on the parallel London Bridge, because London Bridge is one of the earliest settlements you can unlock, and to do so, you'll have to deal with Beefy.
Roll up, ladies, gents, schools, Thames folk, and all identities. Step right up and pay the toll tax for the safety of the finest bridge in all of London. Don't be shy, it's only 10 tickets per person, and I promise, the view is worth every penny.
As it turns out, Beefy is a former beefeater themselves, and I had this super unique and fun interaction due to me having the appropriate perk as I met Beefy.
Whoa, matey. I'd be keeping that one to yourself. Secret's safe with me. I ain't one to judge. But don't you worry, because I'm not one of those cannibals anymore. I've given up that nasty habit. And now I only eat the finest meats from the finest butchers. I'm quite the refined ex-cannibal. You could say I've gone from eating long pig to eating Brahmin burgers. Full disclosure, it was a dark time in my life, mate.
One of the other really cool and notable quests you'll do is breaking into the Bank of London. This is a main story quest, and it has that incredibly satisfying outcome where you properly get to break into the Grand Vault and witness all of the gold for yourself. But you could also get a new companion here.
Kira Star, Heart Kira.
But one of the other very notable side quests is for Alistair Tenpenny. This is a super fun interaction in Westminster.
I've never seen you before, and I never forget a face. Where are you from? Why, how blunt of you. Interesting. I'm just curious, you see. It's not often we have brand new people here in Westminster.
Alistair Tenpenny is, of course, the owner of Tenpenny Tower from Fallout 3. Fallout London takes place just 40 years prior to Fallout 3. So we have a younger version of Alistair here in London with Tenpenny Manor. And Alistair does have a pretty fun side quest of his own as he is frustrated with his view.
Do you notice anything off about this fantastic view? Exactly. It's that cursed Ferris wheel. When my parents, my deceased wife's parents, picked this plot of land, they chose it because it gave them a perfect view of London, not of that decrepit thing. That is why I have brought you here.
But thankfully, we can help Alistair out. This was another example of having multiple methods to complete a certain task. As to blow up the eye, there are several places you can acquire the explosives. And even how you approach the eye itself, as you do have options to just turn on Alistair to save the eye instead, warn the locals ahead of the destruction so they could flee the area, but still end up blowing things up, or don't say anything, just blow things up and ignore those locals, leave them to their own fate. I ended up warning the locals so they could evacuate and eventually went for the explosion anyway.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom.
But to my surprise, this was not the end of this story, as several hours of real-life time later, those locals I warned found me and wanted to take revenge because, well, yeah, I blew up their home for 1,000 tickets. But overall, this was a super fun quest that does seem to have several interesting outcomes. Over the course of the story, you do meet several faction heads, and many of these people have super interesting bases. Camelot is a full set of knights and squires that genuinely use arrows and swords, which was pretty wild to find. But perhaps even cooler was the Cyberfox, which is a full-on nightclub in Camden. Apparently, it's a very accurately recreated version of a real-life location. And yeah, it was a simple place, but super unique, and I think they did a great job with its implementation. I personally completed Fallout London with Angel. They're that secret organization from the start, and I won't spoil much about them, but you can also beat the mod with either the Fifth Column or Camelot, and I have to imagine those versions of the ending are a bit more positive. Angel is definitely the evil option, and yeah, you definitely get fairly evil. Blackmailing royals is hilarious, but burning down towns with the people still in their homes is easily one of the darkest things I have ever done in a Fallout game, but I kinda love doing it. But the epic conclusion will be the battle for London. It seems like regardless of which faction faction you side with, you'll have this as an ending. And they did a phenomenal job with this. I'm doing this from the Angel side, so I'm up against Camelot and 5th column troops, but between the sounds, the number of combatants, and really just overall, this truly feels like an epic final battle in this cool urban environment. It's really not like something I've ever experienced in a Fallout game before. It was easily one of my favorite moments in this mod, and probably one of my most fun moments in a Fallout game generally. You really get to roleplay as a soldier in an urban environment for a half hour to an hour. And one of the interesting choices with Fallout London is there is a hard cutoff, in that there is a point of no return fairly early on where you must side with Angel or choose another faction to end the game with, but at that moment the other options will be aggroed to you. But also, after this final battle, the game just ends. Fallout London does have ending slides, which are super well done, very New Vegas-esque, and these will reflect not only your major story decisions, but also several side characters and what becomes of them. But as the credits roll, you are just put back at the main menu, so make sure you make a save before ending this one, as you'll probably want to have one before that point of no return. But overall, yeah, Fallout London is a fantastic mod. I highly recommend giving it a try for yourself. I'll have links down below for you to download it. But if you want to get excited for other DLC-sized mods on their way to Fallout 4, check out this video.